Actually, his real name was not Mwariama. Mwariama is a name that he was called. In Kimeru, Mwariama means the bearer or the speaker of truth. So he was a gardener for one white man who was living presently, I think, in Narumoro. And he told his comrades that he would kill that man, take his gun, and join them in the forest. He did exactly that. At one point, they caught one of the white Johnnies who were these soldiers. And he would set an example. They would take the white boy and they would boil him alive. At one point, he had 7 gunshot wounds on his end while serving in the forest. And for 6 months, he lived in a cave alone with an aide until he fully recovered. My name is Kelvin Kubai. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. My middle name is Mugambi, which in Kimeru means a lawyer, a judge, can translate anything. So sometimes there's power in the naming. I did not intend that this be my name, but it appears to define my practice and profession. I practice especially on areas of environmental, such as environmental litigation, class actions involving human rights violations, and historical land injustices. And I'm also a lover of history and a scholar of history.
Why would you want to describe yourself as a lover of history? Why is history important?
I think history is wholly important because it explains to us who we are, where we've come from. It defines our present and our future.
Why would someone of your generation, such a young age, why would you be interested in history?
Given my family's history, this is something that is unavoidable in my situation, and most of the things I do today, even including most of the litigations I've been engaged in, most of them have relied wholly on history. I've done quite a number of cases in this country, and I find that most of them are shaped by policies that were instituted quite a long time ago. And these policies continue to affect even what we find in the modern day world. And so my interest to history and trying to learn is not just for my own sake, but I find so many solutions hidden within the books of history that if we just but took time to understand, then we would have so many solutions to our modern day problems.
You did not tell us that you are the grandson of the famous General Mwariama.
Both my maternal and paternal grandparents actually fought in the Mau Mau War. My grandfather, Field Marshal Mwariama, used to lead the KRA forces in Nyambene. At the time of independence in 1963, he had a battalion of 2,000 men, and he was able to bring his forces out of the forest alive. And my maternal grandfather also served under Field Marshal Baimunge, who was at the time serving in the Mount Kenya region at a place around Ntirimeti. So I have a rich history from my family of the Mau Mau movement, first-hand history. I was not lucky to find them alive. Just my maternal grandparent, I did manage briefly to meet them alive, and they told me stories.
You talked of your maternal, grandparent having been also in Mau Mau with General Baimunge. Could you mention the name of that person and when he passed on?
He's Murira Karikicha. He passed on in 2002, and we buried him in Meru. Actually, especially for the Baimunge's function of Mau Mau, they were really hunted down by the independent government. And so many times he never used to stay in Timau, where now my parents were born, for the fear of the government officers who are coming rounding up anyone who's serving under Baimunge, in the fear that they were planning to go back again in the forest. So he lived a life of fear, trying to run away from the very government that they were fighting to put in place, until now his term was in 2002.
Okay, let me ask you about how we understand General Mwariama.
Yeah.
There's a view that we have of General Mwariama from the textbooks and
Yes.
other books. And then there is the General Mwariama that your family knows. So I wanted you to speak to the two Mwariamas,
Yes.
the two images,
Yeah.
so that you can tell us who is the real General Mwariama.
As a man, from what I've seen and heard from my uncles, he was a man who loved his country. He loved discipline. His punishment was collective. Sometimes they would do something, or as kids growing up, kids are usually they're up and down. So one of the kids does something and the others don't report. So he'll collectively punish them all. And this instilled in them a culture of, if someone does wrong, they would definitely go to report to him, because if the report finds him before any one of you explains it to him, then he'll punish you all collectively for the failure to report or bring this issue to his attention. And he loved peace. He was a man of peace. So much you would wonder why a man would be so peaceful. But again, when you read in the textbooks, he was very lethal, one of the most lethal generals there were in the war. Stories are told that at one point they caught one of the white Johnnies who were these soldiers, and he would set an example. They would take the white boy and they would boil him alive, and these would scare now the other Johnnies who would come looking for him, and they find him boiling in a pot of hot water, and they would run away. In one battle, they ran away, leaving their own machine guns behind. And the Mau Maus collected these machine guns and now used them to fight them. So he was extremely lethal in the story text, and he was extremely brave. Mm-hmm. At one point, he had 7 gunshot wounds on his hand while serving in the forest. And for 6 months, he lived in a cave alone with an aide until he fully recovered. The colonial government at one point, because he was quite tall, he was very tall, not as I am, but some of my uncles have gained his height. He was extremely tall and strong. So at one point, the British officers went and found giraffe skeletons, and they went around the villages telling the soldiers that they had killed General Mwariama. And because now they had these giraffe skeletons, and people would see how tall they are, they somehow believed that that was Mwariama, because he was quite tall, and he inspired a lot of courage. He got into the forest, as I'm told, by one incident. Actually, his real name was not Mwariama. Mwariama is a name that he was called. In Kimeru, Mwariama means the bearer or the speaker of truth. And at the time when he was giving the oath, he told the fellow comrades who he was with that he would kill his employer. At that time, he was serving as a house help. They're called boys, garden boys. Mm-hmm. So he was a gardener for one white man who was living presently, I think, in Narumoro. And he told his comrades that he would kill that man, take his gun, and join them in the forest. He did exactly that. From time to time, because he was also trusted by this gardener, this white man, he would go and boil hot water. Then with this hot water, he would feed the cows with hot water. So once the cow drinks hot water, the cow starts, dying slowly. And he would go and tell his boss, Bwana Mkubwa. They used to call them Bwana Mkubwa, the whites who are their employers. bwana mkubwa, ng'ombe naleta shida. And the white man will tell him, what do we do? It tells the white man, now we have to kill this one before it spreads the disease to the other cows, because as at now we don't know what ailing this cow. To tell him, that is very wise of you, Musa, just do that and bury it far away such that this disease does not spread to the other cows. And that will solve his puzzle, because now he will pretend that he killed the cow and buried it away, and he will kill it and take the meat to the forces in the forest and tell bwana mkubwa that he buried the cow, until now the very last day when he killed the white man, cut off his head and walked with it to the forest with his comrades and told him, this is my master. And from there he started administering the oath to so many young people. He inspired a lot of morale to the soldiers, especially after the death of Kimathi, and morale was dying in the forest. But he took the helm of power. He started marshalling new forces back into the forest and revived the movement even until independence. And even after independence, he continued to bring a lot of morale to the forces.
What do your family members say his childhood was like? Did he go to school? Was he a good student? What do you hear?
These were privileges that he did not afford. But his brother, he has a brother, an elder brother, who was able to go to school. His elder brother was known as Ntomboi. He was able to go to school. His father loved him, but his father, was not so happy with Mboi, because Mboi had accepted the white man, and his father was against this new white man who came even with a very foreign god that they did not understand. In fact, Mboi had also gone ahead to embrace everything there was, even in the region, including the new initiation rate. Now the Catholic missionaries were now even circumcising the young boys in the Christian way. They find the traditional Meru initiation rate to be, as they would say, ungodly. And Mwariama held that so much. Even when he grew up, he so much wanted his family to embrace the Meru culture, not to be like his brother who had embraced the other culture, to an extent that he insisted that all his sons, even during initiation, they are initiated through the traditional Meru way. And he was a very godly man. I don't know why sometimes people don't understand the concept between one being traditional and at the same time embracing God or spirituality. Because while in the forest, he was also he was a spiritual leader. Actually, more than a general commanding forces, he was more into a spiritual leader. Because sometimes there is one battle they fought near Tirimeti, as I'm told, and they were besieged and surrounded by the white forces. And they prayed. They had nothing else to do. They knelt down and started praying. And it rained like it's never rained before. Thunderstorms, hails. And the white man could no longer hold this siege because of the rain and the mist. So through this confusion of the rain, the thunderstorms, the mist, they broke the siege and escaped. So they believed so much. They were believers, and he led them also in this spiritual knowledge. He wrote so many songs which inspired the soldiers during the war. Some of these songs and these notes have been sung by even present generations, including Rio's song Mwenenyaga. So he was a spiritual leader. He inspired his forces, and he also embraced the Meru culture and traditions. I think this was because his father loved traditions, and he was against what his brother had done by fully embracing the new modernity.
How was he, as a personality? Was he charismatic? Was he?
He was.
Would you say
he was extremely charismatic?
Was he an orator?
Yes, he was an orator, and I think that's a gift that has been passed down generations. Most of my uncles have, become leaders in various in various places of their work. I think inheriting from him, but most importantly, he was a very humble man. He did not consider himself, by the way, as such a decorated general leader. He was quite humble. And so many times, and as I pointed out, he was quite peace-loving. You know, from where he hailed and from where even my other grandparents hailed in Timau, because they all stayed in Timau, it was one closely knit community of ex-Mau-Maus. And they loved one another so much that they would not even harm one another. And they growing up in Timau, you grew as a child of a community, because these were comrades that fought in the war. They're people who understood one another and loved one another and praised one another. Their immediate neighbor was the first Lads Minister, Jackson Angaine. And Jackson Angaine was a collaborator. The sworn enemies, most of the sworn enemies of the Mau, actually, before killing one white man, they had to kill like 1,000 collaborators. So there was so much war and animosity between the Mau and the collaborators. So even after independence, most of the villagers or most of his forces will tell him, why don't we harm this collaborator here, who's now become a minister, being a lord of us? Why don't we kill him? And he told them, this is an independent country with peace that we fought for, with our own flag. Please let us do him no harm. As much as he's doing us harm, as much as he's hunting us down, and for a very long time, the Mau were regarded as terrorists. So he compelled them not to do Angaine any harm. Until recently, one elder who died in the village, he was very elderly. I think he died at the age of about 120 years. Everyone in the village, including the elders, called him an elder because when he was serving in the army, he died recently, and he was such a great man. He was the one who was besieging Mwariama so much that we need to punish Angaine. And being an elder, he was being sent by the others, speak to Mwariama, you are elder than him, so he should listen to you. You tell him, please, let us not do any harm. He was known as Nderi. If you go to Timau and you ask about Nderi, everyone can tell you that is the most elderly person they have ever seen. Because even when they were fighting in the war, Nderi was still an old man. He was still elderly. Most of these guys joining Momo were in their 20s. But Nderi might have been in his 40s, 50s, so they regarded him as Mzee.
General Mwariama, when did he become field marshal? Would you know? And who appointed him? And what kind of links did he have with Baimunge, Kimathi, and the rest?
Much of what was done in the forest, including understanding the leadership of the Mau, could only be understood from inside their own echelons, because they were an extremely secretive society and community. Partly because they almost were at war, not just with the colonial government, but also with all these collaborators who the colonial government had. The colonial government was so good at divide and rule. And they managed to sustain the Mau War because of their secrecy. So after the demise of Kimathi, there was a lot of confusion within the Mau, to the extent that the British government and the colonial government was actually taking credit of having fully resolved or quenched or curtailed the threat posed by the Mau. And so amidst this confusion is when Mwariama provided direction, and he started reviving the Mau and administering a new oath from 1957 after the death of Kimathi, reviving and telling them the war is not over and we've not yet been defeated. And through this renewal of this oath, we had more forces and more people now coming in and taking up arms. The Mau War did not just begin at the state of emergency. In fact, the state of emergency was declared after they now saw that this issue has become pronounced. Even before the state of emergency was pronounced, there was already animosity the Mau had begun to organize, and they did this from a very long time, including when they were burning the treetops and so on and so forth. So they began organizing Mau, which began as an organic movement of people. I would say they had gained this class consciousness where they were able to understand that they shared a common enemy, or they shared a common, they had a common oppression force that they would all want to fight for. And this oppression was this colonial government and colonial administration. So most of these young men who had developed this consciousness that indeed we have a shared problem, and unless we rise up against this shared and common enemy, then we will not emancipate ourselves. So as early as 1940, people are starting to gain this class consciousness and to understand that the colonial government is, if we continue living under this colonial rule, the colonial government had taken away their lands, they were being forced into concentration camps, they were being imposed with hard tax and fines, they were being imposed to carry kipandes, they were being subjected to brutality and torture, they were being constantly harassed, their freedom of movement curtailed, their own rights and freedoms of association again being suppressed. And then, they were living under microscopic management by the colonial government. So they developed as class consciousness, as what I see today in my generation, where young people are starting to understand that we have a common enemy brought by political cronyism, that the entire political elite are our enemy as a country. And for many years they have lied to us that the Luos are the enemies of the Kikuyus are enemies to Kalenjin. So we've been fighting, and our parent and our politics has all been under traditional or tribal parochialism and tribal balkanization, where one tribe is balkanized to fight the other tribe. And the present generation seems to understand that no, it's not about tribe, it's about we have a common enemy here in terms of these tribal or these political chronism. The political class have no tribe. Yeah. But deep below they want us to fight a war of their own. So this is what the Mau developed, a class consciousnness. The Mau was a shared ideology. It was not a shared tribe. Most of his forces were both Kikuyu, Embu, Meru. He even had some from Maasai and Laikipia. So, and as you understand the Kenyan dynamics, there are people of different tribes, different cultures, including sometimes in the forest when conducting these prayers. There will be confusion because you have a force that has had different cultural upbringing. Do we pray to Ngai? Do we pray to Morungu? Do we pray to the Maasai Kai? So he had a role to bring and harmonize this force into a very disciplined force that was fighting a common enemy. And the colonial government, I've read through the intelligence briefings even of 1956, they used a lot of propaganda. And this happens to be a rule book that even successive regimes have done. They would spread information. They would go to the local radios and start saying that Maus, for instance, in Muranga today, 500 have surrendered, and that is even forced. And other forces hearing that their compatriots in the other side of the forest have surrendered was creating a lot of demoralization to the troops. And in other cases, they would go spreading pamphlet. I've told you they also spread propaganda that Mwariama himself had been captured and was dead. And they were carrying around giraffe skeletons showing that this is Mwariama who was telling you to take oath and go back to the forest. But now you see, we captured him and he's dead and these are his skeletons. So amidst all these propaganda that was state-sponsored, being spread by various media, both the print media, because they would publish so much news in the dailies then, and they would use the available radios, and they would use the provincial administration. The provincial administration was the most organized group through which propaganda was disseminated from the colonial government, because the chiefs at the lowest level of the provincial administration were able to pass information from the colonial governor. So the colonial governor would, for instance, choreograph a message that so many terrorists have been captured and they are surrendering, and this information will flow all the way to the chief. and even panic spread across these villages. So Mwariama stood to bring new hope. The war was taking a toll on them. Some got into the forest as early as 1940. By 1956, those were 16 years. Someone in the forest fighting, not knowing until when this fighting will end. And they were beginning to get toiled, and now Mwariama comes bringing so much hope. His most of his biggest camp was in Nyambene, through the Nyambene forest. And from time to time, the good thing about Mount Kenya, they understood it so well. They had their routes. From Nyambene, he could actually go to Embu, and from Embu, he could actually go to Mount Kenya, where Baimunge's troops were in Kieni, Kenene, in Tirimeti, and he could move through the same Mount Kenya forest and go to Narumoro, where other camps were situated. And then Kimathi, before his demise, was much more concentrated on the Aberdare region, where most of his forces were. So, and they used to have periodic meetings, but these meetings were communicated in very discreet ways that you will not even know, and unless you were at a certain level of this leadership, because again of the fear, because there was fear that the British government might infiltrate some people who are spies to also come into the army, and when they come into the Mau Mau, then they would sell the secret of the Mau Mau. And I look at the Mau Mau as almost a genocide by these young men choosing to join this force. Was in itself a suicidal mission, because they were fighting not just a foreign military, but they were fighting a military that was well trained, well equipped, almost at the international level. And the British government or the British forces were not holding back. They were going full throttle against the Mau Mau, who on one side held almost like crude weapons, homemade guns, so they did not have access. Sometimes they would send emissaries to go and buy some guns, even from Ethiopia. So we see on one side it's just people fighting for the love of their motherland, and on the other side we have a well-equipped, well-financed, well-organized, and well-trained international class army that is not holding back. They were even bombarding them with warplanes and dropping bombs at them in the forest. And the Mau Mau, one of the strategies they did actually was they would go and light fires very much far away from the camp. So if they set up a camp here, they will go and light small fires like 10 kilometers away. So they send some scouts to go and light fires there. So when they light these fires, the colonial government will see the fires and say, well, we've spotted the Mau Mau camp. So they'll take warplanes and go to bombard these fires. So the Mau Mau will be here laughing as the planes bombard the fires on the opposite side of where their camp is.
So part of what Mwariama did was to administer a new oath, the Kiraka oath.
Correct. And Kiraka in Kimeru means repair. Repair is mending. And the reason why repairing or mending was being done was because already damage has been done. You cannot mend. Kiraka especially comes from the patches they put on the clothes. So if you see, our parents growing up, they did not afford to buy new clothes now then. So if your cloth was torn, what you did was put a kiraka. You put a patch. So Mwariama was patching because already there were cracks, or already there were sieges, already there was this lift that was coming in. And so he brought this new oath of trying to repair and mend the force as it was even before the murder, the capture and subsequent murder of Field Marshal Kimathi. And then there were also personal strife and wrangles, especially on leadership and so on and so forth. And he was trying to tell them what matters is we bring our individual forces out of the forest alive, and we fight this war until to the very end. And he did so well because at least he managed to get alive from the forest with over 2,000 soldiers alive, as at the time when he was surrendering his weapons at Roriongo.
That surrender in December 1963 was momentous in the if only because of the name, surrender.
Yeah.
Because why would they be surrendering in December 1963? And this was a surrender to an African government.
You bring a very good point. You bring an extremely good point, because after independence in June, it was until 6 months later in December that we see Field Marshal Mwariama now marshalling his forces from the forest, because most of them did not even know the declaration of independence as it was happening in June. They were deep in the forest, although at the highest echelons they could get this information that an independence has been achieved. And this shows also, sometimes I've seen especially the political leaders try to buy into the Mau Mau movement and say people like Kenyatta, people like the cow leaders, the Kikuyu African Union were sponsoring the Mau Mau. Actually, there was a very big disconnect between the Mau Mau and the political agitators. I say so because, one, even after independence was declared, had the Mau Mau served under the masses of the political leaders like the Kikuyu African Union, they would have known that independence was being declared, and they would have actually surrendered at the time. They would have gone from the forest celebrating in 1963. But they continued to fight because for them, this was an organic movement that arose as a result of young men coming to the realization that we have a common enemy, which is being oppression from the colonial government, who've taken all our rights and freedoms, including our land. And they had an organic movement, and they came together to fight a common enemy. But we had also the political commentators who had access and flow of information by the colonial government. And as I pointed out at the beginning of this interview, the day most Kenyans realized that our independence in 1963 was not spontaneous, was not something that erupted as a volcanic. It was something that was organized almost minute by detail by the colonial government, to the extent that they actually had picked Jomo Kenyatta to succeed the colonial government. There are reports and telegrams that you will find in those intelligence briefings that the colonial government actually considered 4 people to whom to pass the mantle. They considered Ronald Gala, they considered Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, they considered Moi, and they considered Jomo Kenyatta. For Ronald Gala, they saw that he was coming from the coast region, which was not the majority of the community, so they did not know how to sell him as a successor from the colonial government. And for Moi, they thought he was a little younger, so the older people might object to his succession. For Kenyatta, he was mixed. They did not know whether to fully associate him with the Mau Mau or to associate him with the collaborators. So at one point, they said...
And Jaramogi?
For Jaramogi, they had also considered him, but he seemed to have socialist views and ties with Russia. And so the CIA, the Americans and the British thought that he will become problematic to them because of these socialist ideals and his ties to Russia, which they seemed to have intelligence briefings on. And so they settled on Kenyatta simply because they sent emissaries to Kenyatta. And on arrival, what concerned Kenyatta was the rice that they were giving him at Kapenguria. And he told them, ile mchele mnanipea, it's not up to standard, it's not up to quality. And the telegraph they sent back to London was, we can work with him. They simply said, we can work with him. So they started simply now turning Jaramogi to take over. And the condition for...
Jaramogi or Jomo?
Jomo Kenyatta, pardon for that. So they saw that they could work with Jomo, because Jomo's concern was the rice. They were not giving him quality rice. So they saw that if this is someone who is concerned about rice, we only need to give him proper quality in the English mannerism, and then we can work with him. And they sent a telegraph saying we can work with him. And so they started slowly branding him, ready now to transition and give him power. So in 1963, when the colonial government now declared independence, the Mau Mau don't see that independence, because for them what they expected was, if this independence is coming, we expect to take back what was taken from us. We expect to take back our land. But the Kenyatas and the other political elite in Nairobi, what they wanted was the political power. They wanted to inherit the colonial government. In other words, not to change the status quo and restore everything back to normalcy as it was before this coming of the colonial government, but in other words, to take up power from the colonial government. So there was a lot of disconnect, and that explains why the Mau Mau did not see that independence as the political elite would see it, and explains why they continued being in the forest from 1963 up until December. So when they were being called to Roriongo Stadium to surrender, as it was commonly called, they were being called to surrender because from the eyes of the political elite who now took over the power from the government, the Mau Mau were nothing but a bunch of terrorists who sought to destabilize this newfound peace. And because they had inherited, now they were at the table where they were eating. They saw that the Mau Mau continued agitation of land rights was in a way taking away legitimacy from them, was in a way disturbing their newfound peace. And they wanted to maintain the status quo so that they continued leading as the colonial government was leading. So Kenyatta, on taking up the leadership of this country in 1963, started choreographing a way to now scale down or demobilize the Mau Mau. And he finds the easiest way to do this is to call their leaders, and then after calling their leaders, then I can give them some assurances. I can be able to buy these leaders, and when I buy these leaders, then these leaders should be able to scale down and call their forces to return from the forest. And so Kenyatta summons Mwariama and a number of other generals in the army, and he gives Mwariama a flag, a Kenyan flag, and tells him, now this is what we were fighting for. Mwariama is happy that he has a flag, and he's happy that now Kenyatta is telling him that we are now an independent country, we are now ruling ourselves. And he gives him some promises and tells him, Mwariama, you take your forces out of the forest, I'll give you land where you want land. But Mwariama and Baimunge they make a voice and tell him, partly, well, we appreciate you giving us these flags, and you are offering us even security, because Kenyatta was telling them that I will also give you a Land Rover and now police to give you security. But Mwariama told him, our forces cannot come back from the forest if we do not give them the independence that they were looking for, and that is land. We must give these people land and restore them back and give them back what was taken from them, because that is what they understand to be independence. But giving me flags and telling me that we are now in an independent country is not something that they can relate with, because to them independence means economic independence and not political independence as the leaders then made it to seem. And Kenyatta makes some concessions. He tells Mwariama that we will give you a hero's welcome at Roriongo. And on that day when we have these heroes welcome, then you will bring up the arms and your forces from the forest. And when you bring these guns and surrender, then I will ensure that your people are given back land. And especially in Meru district, and there was so much issues and agitation, because in Meru there was renewed oath. Mwariama had done a great job in renewing this oath, and actually more men were even coming into the forces to join the Mau Mau. Even in 1963, even at the time of independence, we have more young men joining the war. And so it seems like instead of dying, it is actually reviving. And Kenyatta choreographs a plan. He chooses a minister of land from Meru, which seems to be the most problematic district for this new independent Kenya. And he tells Mwariama, you can see, even the minister of land is a person from your place there in Meru. So he, being Meru, will be able to answer your questions for land, because I have given him the mandate to be able to distribute land. So to an extent, Mwariama sees that if the issue of land is then solved, he's able to ask his forces to lay down the arms at Roriongo, which he does in December of 1963. And after laying down the arms, there is a land distribution that is done by the Kenyatta government. They are given settlement schemes in Timau and other part of Meru. And these settlement schemes, they are supposed to pay a loan. Actually, this land was given to them and they were supposed to pay for it as a loan. It was not free land. It was actually land they were supposed to buy. And you know, most of these forces, they could not understand that concept where they have now to pay with money for what they bought with their blood. They could not understand why they should sell their milk to the settlement, to the land settlement trustee and their pyredram, and that will be deducted from this loan until now they're given titles. In fact, they were not given titles, they were only given possession, and they were supposed to keep cows and grow pyredram, and they were supposed to harvest pyredram and milk the cows and take to a society. Then this society used to have the list, you know, this loan. This was choreographed through James Gishuru. And at the time, the German government and the British government had formed what they called the 1 million acre fund. And that 1 million acre fund was morphed up into this trustee scheme, where now ex-Mau forces were supposed to buy back this land. I mean, ideally, the government had sought to buy land on their behalf. But Kenyatta now through this policy of willing buyer, willing seller. And this is everything the Mau found to be wrong with this willing buyer, willing seller. They have spent their entire life, their entire energy in the forest. They do not even have that capacity to buy. And they've bought this land with their blood. So they could not understand why they have again to buy this land, now using this currency, their milk and pyredram. And there is a differing in ideology on the distribution of land and even as to the extent of independence. So Mwariama, the land is distributed, the forces are told this land now they have to pay for it. In 1964, there is a disquiet. Most of these ex-Maus cannot understand why they have to buy back this land. Some of them have begun to even call for a return into the forest. Their opinions are also rubber-stamped by the opinion of some political leaders like Jaramogi, who said not yet Uhuru, and Bildad Kagia, who was also finding a lot of problem with this new land policy. And Kenyatta choreographs a plan where Mwariama is arrested and incarcerated without trial on allegations that he was holding what the charges were, an association, or rather he was doing an unsanctioned meeting. So many delegations used to come to see him, and most of these ex-Maus would want to see how their general is faring in after coming from the forest. And so he's arrested on those allegations that he is holding a public baraza without a permit. So Mwariama is arrested and he's detained. No one knows where. And this is now independent Kenya. His forces now, actually after his arrest, threaten now to go back to the forest and take up arms, seeking his release. And Jomo Kenyatta sees that this strategy of abducting Mwariama and incarcerating him is not working. And in fact, it is fueling the war more. And so he makes a plan through Jonjo for the release of Mwariama. And he lies to Mwariama that, it is the white people who had arrested you. And because they arrested you without me knowing, I will actually release you without them knowing. So Mwariama is put in a position where he thinks that his arrest was by the British forces. Remember, he doesn't even properly understand that now power has shifted. The colonial government is no longer in control of the arms of power, but it's the Kenyan government. So when Kenyatta lies to him that these people who arrested you without my knowledge, I will now release you without their knowledge, Mwariama sees that now Kenyatta is a friend. He is actually. So Kenyatta creates a problem for Mwariama, which he solves and appears as a hero in the eyes of Mwariama. And Mwariama sees that now Kenyatta is a friend because he's agitated for my release. and I was actually incarcerated even without trial, and he was imprisoned. So Kenyatta releases him, and Mwariama is now told, now, because these people arrested you without me knowing, I've released you without them knowing, and I want you to help me, because now your friend Baimunge seems now to cause more problem in Meru. So Kenyatta now wants to use Mwariama to even buy back Baimunge, who was more radical, because Baimunge stood his ground firmly and said that he could not at all agree to this Kenyatta's plan of land redistribution. They were given small parcels of land, if you ask me, because they were given 18 acres of land. And these 18 acres, these are people who had spent their entire life in the forest fighting. So many of them are not even been able to begin families. Like Mwariama, began his family after his arrest. He was not able to keep a family well inside the forest. So some of them are beginning to settle in. Baimunge becomes more radical. He marshals up his forces slowly by slowly and returns back to the forest. And I've seen intelligence briefings of 1963 and 1964 through the office of the provincial commissioner then, Eliud Mayo. And Eliud Mayo would give weekly and monthly reports on the activities of General Baimunge into the Meru district, and how he was marshalling and calling up forces back to the forest to agitate for land. The Kenyatta government choreographs a strategy for active repression of the Mau Mau, especially in the Meru district. They even imposition a curfew. The first curfew in independent Kenya was made in Meru. Beyond 5 p.m. no man in Meru was supposed to be found outside his hut. So this is independent Kenya. They are not doing anything much different from what the colonial government was doing. Men in Meru are stopped from carrying arms. They cannot carry their bows, arrows, spears, machetes, and they are supposed to be home within a certain period. Simply because now Kenyatta's government is apprehensive of these Baimunge's hard stand and radical stand.
How long did that curfew last?
It lasted for quite a time, about 2 years, trying to curtail.
And this was even before the Shifta war?
Correct. Mm-hmm. To a big extent, there was a misunderstanding by the intelligence community in 1963-1964 about the relationship between the Shifta and the Mau Mau. Because, you see, the Meru and the Borana, to a big extent, had relations even way before the colonial government, because they traded mira with honey and cows and milk, so they had that relation. Sometimes Shiftas will be captured, and some of them will be found to be hailing from Meru. And so the intelligence briefings of 1963 and 1964, to an extent, could not disassociate the Shifta and the Meru. And there was also the apprehension that the Mau Mau remnant in Meru were getting weapons from the Shifta because of this relationship between the Meru, the Borana, and the Somalis then. So these Shifta wars actually rubber stamp Kenya's decision to instill these curfews in Meru district. And these curfews seem to even fuel more agitations. In a last attempt, Kenyatta gives Mwariama a Land Rover and is taken around the entire Meru district. Kenyatta tells him to go, being able to de-escalate the tensions and spreading this new message and spreading this new oath. And now he was telling people, now I'm giving you another oath for peace. And this oath is for us now to love our country, to grow our families, to grow our food, and to integrate into this community, because we now have our independence. So Mwariama is sponsored to go across the entire Meru district, de-escalating these tensions brought about by land injustice and this land redistribution in the district. But Baimunge remains strong, he remains radical, he remains grounded on the fact that this land redistribution is not being done in a just and fair manner, and we cannot buy what we bought with our blood. In a last attempt, Kenyatta calls Baimunge and Mwariama and General China to Gatondo in his home. And he asked Baimunge, why is it, Baimunge, that you want to undermine my authority? To Kenyatta's eyes, this is about a personal undermining of his authority. He sees Baimunge not kneeling down as him being, not as an undermining of his authority. He sees Baimunge as someone who's not, appreciating that Kenyatta is the president. Baimunge tells him that we cannot agree with you because this is not what we fought for. We fought for independence of our land, and we cannot be getting land and then we are subjected to us now having to pay. Everything we farm is taken from us to go and pay loans for a land that was taken from us. This land was ours, so why are you, Kenyatta, telling us to buy this land again? So Baimunge differed in ideology with Kenyatta. And a hungry Kenyatta storms the meeting, bangs tables, and tells Baimunge, you are completely undermining my authority, and you will understand that this is now my country under my authority. Baimunge tells him, you can do what you want, but just know that we will not agree to this policy. And we fought for this land with our blood. We've died, so many of us in the forest, fighting for it. And what we fought for is just an equitable redistribution of this land, not this policy of willing buyer, willing seller. And the meeting ends without any, and this is now in 1964, the meeting ends without any amicable solution. Baimunge, Kenyatta gives, Mwariama and Baimunge and China and their entire delegation bought a Land Rover at the mercies of Kenyatta, and they are taken all the way to Meru. Then from Meru, we have Baimunge returning to Mount Kenya to join his comrades, and we have Mwariama now taking his other way to go to his home and family, new home in Kiambogo, Timau. Following that very night, Kenyatta sets a delegation of special branch and officers who go and find General Baimunge deep in the forest. He is shot down together with 3 other persons and his scout. He had his gun with him, and he had a Land Rover, and he had 12,000 shillings. So these, together with his guns, were taken, and they were taken to the museum. His family has been trying to agitate for them to be repatriated back to them, and they've never been repatriated back.
Which museum?
Our National Museum. You may be able to find some of these guns. What people don't understand about the Momo is that they also had their own accounting system. They had money. It's not always that they used to. If they stole cows from their enemies. They stole cows from collaborators and cows from the white person. Those are the cows they used for food. But when dealing with the other persons who are appreciative of them, they used to buy. And so they had a lot of money they used to buy from those who they agreed with. Baimunge had 12,000 shillings with him, and some of his guns and belongings and a Land Rover. This is taken, and this was an operation led by, which was sanctioned by Kenyatta, and commissioned, of course, through his trusted minister in Meru, the then Minister of Land, Jackson Angaine. And there's a lot of disquiet, especially in Meru, following the demise of Baimunge. People are confused. After killing him, they take his body and take it to Meru Stadium. And for 3 days, they parade the dead body of Baimunge. His body, in the words of Mwariama, was more of a sieve. There were about 21 bullet holes in his body. After hearing the news that Baimunge had been murdered, he goes all the way to Meru, and he finds the body of Baimunge in Meru. He actually put a finger through one of the bullet holes on his neck, and the finger comes through the hole where the bullet exited on the other side. And tears flow from his eyes in pain, and he cannot understand the betrayal from this very country that they fought for. He cannot understand this was his comrade at war. who they fought with, and now this is his lifeless body, simply because they differed in ideology with the presidency over the same land that they fought for. So he cries and he's traumatized, kneeling down on his lifeless body, his tears flowing on this lifeless body of his comrade. And he goes back to Timau confused and traumatized, not knowing indeed whether they are done wrong to fight for this very country that is now eating its own people. I mean, the Kenyatta government thereon adopted a policy of active repression of anyone who was associated with Baimunge, and that befell my maternal grandparent who served under Baimunge's guard in Meru, because they were seen as people now who in retaliation or in revenge of Baimunge's death would actually now marshal up forces against the Kenyatta regime.
The land was taken?
The land was taken, and several other parcels of land which in the Hansard report of I think 1983, an MP by Mr. Mwongo references a number of parcels of land numbering to about 20 in Timau. These parcels of land were taken by the Minister for Lands, and these lands belonged to people who seemed to have connections with the Baimunge, and they were given to persons who were concubines to the then Minister of Land, Jackson Angaine. So Mwariama is confused, and so are so many other ex-Mau Mau fighters. The Kenyatta government and successive government, including the Moi regime, labels them as terrorists. They are seen to be agent of destabilizing of this new state. Remember, the political elite, who were agitating for independence, wanted to inherit the colonial government. They actually did want to change the status quo. While the Mau Mau looked at freedom as a way of changing the status quo, of restoring the serenity and the sanctity that was there before this coming of the colonial government. So there's differing in ideology and understanding of the concept of independence between the real grounds people, the Mau Mau fighters, and the political elite then made the successive government to be apprehensive. They feared the Mau Mau because they understood. They did not underestimate them because they knew if these men could fight the colonial government for such a long time, so how much more would they be able to fight us if we are not careful with them? So they form these campaigns and propaganda campaigns of discrediting the Mau Mau, of making them look like villains. Baimunge was branded as a thief and a terrorist and a murderer, and so is many other compatriots. In fact, the very next day after the death of Baimunge, Kenyatta was in Murang'a, where he held a conference. He was seeing some farmers in Murang'a, and he's taking credit of his death, said, mumeona ile ilifanyikia gaidi mwingine anajiita Baimunge. Mimi najaribu kumwambia Kenya tuweke amani, yeye ni vita. Na anasema magaidi wengine, meaning other terrorists who think that they may do like Baimunge, will know that we have a country and we will not let anyone destabilize this country. So Baimunge is victimized, and this has been what makes me sometimes, even in this present country, I've seen as a country we've become a country that every time we victimize our heroes and we celebrate our villains. And this is what happens in 1965. This is now after February, after the death of Baimunge. And so fear is created in the Meru district, and a lot of animosity starts generating in Meru. And for a very long time, by the way, until way later in 1966, Kenyatta himself had never stepped foot in Meru, fearing of fearing that people in Meru district will actually take revenge for his killing of Baimunge. And intelligence briefings of then between 1965 and 1966 will show Eliud Mayu trying to say how the terrorists are trying to integrate in the society. There was even some intelligence briefings that were suggesting that some assistance should be given to these former terrorists to help them integrate in the society more. But this again was objected. And they were apprehensive of Bildad Kagia's view, because Bildad Kagia's views were also similar to the views of General Baimunge, and were also the views of the people like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who felt that it is not yet Uhuru. Jomo Kenyatta has just become a white man in a black skin, and this is not the kind of independence we fought for. So these were voices that were being raised by some other political elites, that Kenyatta regime was apprehensive. These voices may now bring the masses again back to the forest, taking up oaths against the new Kenyan government. The problem we find in Kenya today is there's never been successive justice. I mean, one regime comes and commits atrocities towards the people. Another regime thereafter takes power. But the other regime does not take in itself the responsibility of compensating and restoring people who suffered injustices under the previous regime. And this is what we find after Moi's government took over from Kenyatta's government. It did not offer justice to people who had suffered repression, especially these heroes of the Mau Mau who had suffered repression and injustices under the Kenyatta government, including these murders, including these betrayals. And we are contemplating filing a petition at the High Court in Meru, seeking redress for the murder of Baimunge, the incarceration of Field Marshal Mwariama, and also these lads that were taken away from most of these Mau Mau heroes who are connected to Baimunge as a result of government policy of active repression of the Mau Mau. And this doctrine of successive justice, if entrenched within our legal system, would in a big way lead to social healing and social reconciliation, because what we see is a country where regimes run away from the mistakes of past regimes. I've seen the present regime say that whatever happened in River Yala was the mistakes of the last regime, and instead of taking responsibility, they continue perpetrating the same injustices done by the previous regime. And their only justification is that even the last regime did this. So what we are doing is just what the last regime did. So instead of owning up those mistakes and taking responsibility and offering justice for the mistakes of the past regime, we see present regime continuing to perpetrate and perpetuate these mistakes. And this does not offer any social healing or reconciliation. After the death of Baimunge and until his demise in 1989, Mwariama lived a quiet life. He used to receive so many visitors, most of whom were his comrades during the war, and he also received guests including Professor Maina Kenyatta, who did several interviews with him trying to understand his role and his history in the war. They were contemplating also doing a filming at the coast. Other books were written about him. One specific book is the last Mau Mau field marshals, where they featured quite much with Field Marshal Jane Muthoni. And that was his life. He began farming. His art until then. My grandmother died recently. His first wife. She died recently. She was known as Kabika. Her house was still standing up until recently. At around 2017, during the elections in 2017, she had delivered a letter to Kenyatta. For a long time, Kenyatta used his friendship and his relations with Mwariama for political mileage and political gains. He considered Mwariama his friend. Kenyatta especially wanted to associate with the Mau Mau for political reasons, such that the former Mau Maus and their families supported him. But he never meant it in reality. Even in his son, Kenyatta too, in 2017, after Kabika had delivered a letter to him, Kenyatta, in the company of the then governor of Meru, Kiraito Moronge, who took over governorship in 2017, tells Governor Kiraito to ensure that he takes Kabika to State House so that they can continue the friendship that he had with his husband, that is with her husband now, Field Marshal Mwariama. And that never materializes, and the family has lived maybe with the hope that one day this story or history will be rewritten. And you find that the immediate families of most of these Mau heroes, like Baimunge, like Mwariama, as much as they suffered injustices, the immediate family could not be able to seek justice or redress for them, simply because they were not able to even educate them. They came from the forest quite old. So unlike the second liberation generation, where you see people like Matiba, we see people like the Kibakis and people like Odingas, their families were quite well educated and they themselves were well educated. So with the coming of the new constitution, they were able to stand in court and seek redress for the injustices committed and perpetrated against them for these injustices. But it's now us coming in the third generation who are now able to stand and say that even our forefathers demand justice, just as justice was given to the second liberation heroes who suffered under the Moi regime. Even our forefathers who suffered under the Kenyatta regime also deserve this justice, And we are hopeful that the filing of this petition will, in a big way, help to bring bearing to our own country, which I keep on saying we lost bearing way back in 1963. The first extrajudicial killing independent Kenya was the killing of Field Marshal, was the killing of General Baimunge. And so if we can resolve this injustice committed against Baimunge, we will in a big way help to resolve even other extrajudicial killings that continue to be perpetrated in modern day Kenya, even as we speak presently. I have been frequenting the National Archives, and I will tell you, Daktari, there is one place rich in this country with knowledge. Look no further. It's the archives. Most people know the archives as the spot where they go to meet their dead and to find their bearing. If you're lost in Nairobi, you should only go at the archives, and from there you can find your bearing to where you are going to. And so they associate with archives outside the archives. But inside the archives...
That sounds like a metaphor for a campus, a place where you go
yes,
to find your bearings if you're lost.
Correct.
Including, historical bearing.
Correct. I just hope that instead of just waiting for a date outside the archives, they would wait for a date inside the archives, specifically at the research section, and they would peruse some of these materials available at the National Archives, which is very rich in our history, and it will give them a bearing, not now just of the CBD, but a bearing into their own lives, our communities, and our country, because we lost our bearing as a country, and the only place we can recollect our bearing is at the archives. The very place we go to recollect our bearing around Nairobi is the same place, but this time around it's inside these archives. And I've been frequenting there and finding so much rich material, and I've been, sometimes shocked at the kind of materials I'm finding. I've found report and intelligence report of, the government, of the colonial government, and even the independent government, of even how we came to be. For instance, most of these problems we see today of extrajudicial killings, of abductions, of misuse of the police force by the executive, these are issues that were foreseeable by the colonial government as early as 1960. I have found briefing report of the colonial government detailing that they are apprehensive that indeed giving a police unit that is trained and equipped to the Kenyan politicians after independence would lead to misuse of the police. They were apprehensive that the local politicians or the African leaders who would assume power after them would use this police force to settle political scores. And they had proposed that the police should be under the provincial administration. They had proposed that, for instance, if it is police, Eastern Province, then there is the provincial commissioner for Eastern Province. The police force, there should be a specific force under the Eastern Province. And if a police officer is under the Provincial Commissioner of Eastern Province, this officer could not go to serve in Western Province, or Nyanza Province, or Northeastern Province, or Nairobi Province, or Central Province, or Coast Province, because every province is independent. The police force of every province is independent. And sometimes I've seen confusion. I've seen, and most of the time these abductions have been done, you'll agree with me, is you find some police officers who've been collected to form an amorphous group. And the other day our president was on record saying that he has disbanded this force that was responsible for abductions. So even our executive seems to recognize that indeed there is a unit that is doing these abductions. So the colonial government had foreseen that indeed the police force will become a private militia for the political elite who will take up over after the colonial government. And they were proposing now to have decentralized police force, such that the police is not centralized and very accessible to the executive and abused by the political leadership. And this is what we witness today. We continue to suffer today, and I think that will be one of the reforms, if we dug into our history, that will give us the bearing of how to resolve these issues that we find about abductions. Because a police officer who's under, for instance, Rift Valley Province, and is found in Nairobi abducting people in Nairobi, that police will be acting outside jurisdiction, will be acting ultra vires, because he's registered to be under the police force in Rift Valley Province. So we will not have abuse of officers, someone marshalling a police force for his own benefit. Maybe the only unit that will have serving at the helm is, for instance, unit which have cross-regional work. In 1989, when Mwariama died, he died sucking blood from someone else who had been bitten by a snake, without knowing he had cavities himself. So by sucking that blood, the poison got through his cavities, and he died from the very snake poison that he meant to suck from another being. And today I judge him an honorable man. Either way he would have died, but he died in an honorable way. He died saving another life. And that other person actually lived for a bit longer than he did. And for someone somewhere to say that I live because of what someone else did, I think that is true living. As much as you may amass large amount and quantities of wealth, no one will remember how much wealth you had, but someone will remember what you did so that someone else live. So my grandfather did not manage to have even 10% or even 1% of the wealth of so many people during his lifetime. In fact, he had no wealth at all in comparison to the wealth amassed by the Jonjos, the Kenyattas, or the Kapenguria Sikhs. He did not even have 1% of that. But what he did count, in my views, more than what they did. And I'm happy to have had an opportunity and a chance to speak on this very overwhelming and very noble topic.